For as long as anyone could remember, humans had been the newcomers among the stars. They were not the strongest, not the richest, and certainly not the most advanced. Many of the ancient civilizations looked down on them as children playing, with tools they did not fully understand. But humans had one thing that made them different. They were endlessly patient. When the first trading routes opened, humans were cheated again and again. The merchants of other species would sell broken parts for high prices, trick them with false maps, and demand extra taxes at every checkpoint. Humans did not fight back. They smiled politely, paid the extra cost, and kept moving forward. They told themselves, "We are still learning. Let us be humble." When the first councils were formed between civilizations, humans were given the lowest seat at the table. They were ignored when they spoke, mocked when they shared ideas, and laughed at when they asked for fairness. Other species would say, "Let the humans talk, it will pass the time." And the humans, swallowing their pride, remained calm. They listened. They bowed their heads. They reminded themselves, "We must first earn respect before we can demand it." Even in war, they chose patience. When pirates raided human colonies, humans requested help from the great powers. Those powers delayed, sending aid only when it was convenient. Entire colonies suffered, but still humanity thanked them for even the smallest support. They believed that kindness would one day return kindness. They believed that mercy would be rewarded. But the galaxy did not see their kindness as noble. The galaxy saw it as weakness. Every time a human smiled after being insulted, every time they agreed after being cheated, every time they forgave an attack, the lesson was learned by the others. Humans will endure anything. Humans will never fight back. For decades, this became the truth written across the stars. If you wanted easy trade, you traded with humans. If you wanted cheap labor, you hired humans. If you wanted to bully someone without consequence, you targeted humans. And still, humanity stayed silent. But deep inside, something was slowly changing. Behind every smile was a memory. Behind every bow of the head was a clenched fist hidden away. Humanity's patience was deep, but it was not endless. The final straw came from a place called Erevos, a small colony on the edge of human space. Erevos was not a fortress world or a great center of trade. It was simple and quiet. Families lived there in peace. Children played under skies filled with 3 moons. Farmers grew food for nearby colonies. Miners dug in the earth for rare metals. And dreamers built homes they thought would last for generations. Erevos was not powerful, but it was loved. When the Zerkal Dominion arrived, they came without warning. Their warships broke through the skies like burning knives, and their soldiers fell upon the towns with no mercy. They demanded surrender, but what could farmers and miners surrender with? They had no armies, no weapons, only hope. They begged for peace. They pleaded for the lives of their children. They offered everything they had in exchange for mercy. The Zerkal did not listen. They called the humans of Erevos weak animals and laughed as they destroyed their homes. Fire spread across the fields. Cities were crushed beneath bombardment. Families were torn apart. Those who resisted were slaughtered. Those who begged were enslaved. By the time the Dominion's fleets departed, Erevos was nothing but ash and silence. When human rescue ships finally arrived, there was almost nothing left to save. They found bodies lying in the streets, villages reduced to smoke, and a few survivors hiding in the ruins. And in the center of what had once been a great city, the Zerkal left a message carved into the broken stone. It read, "This is the price of weakness." The survivors wept when they told the story. The soldiers wept when they carried the dead. Across human space, every broadcast repeated the same words. Every parent heard the same message. Every child saw the same horror, and in that moment, humanity felt something they had not felt for centuries. The silence of patience was gone. The galaxy expected humans to bow once again. They expected them to accept the loss, to cry quietly, to keep trading and smiling as they always had. But this time something broke. The grief was too heavy, the wound too deep. Humanity had reached the edge of its patience. For the first time, humanity whispered a word that would change everything. Enough. The tragedy of Erebos spread like wildfire across human space. Every news channel, every colony, every ship traveling between the stars carried the same story. The faces of crying children, the burned fields, the ruined homes, they became the pictures no human could forget. For years, humanity had endured insults and humiliations in silence. But this was not an insult. This was not a trade deal gone wrong. This was not pirates taking advantage of their patience. This was murder. The leaders of humanity gathered on Earth in the Grand Assembly Hall, a place that had once been filled with debates, laughter, and disagreements. But on that day, the hall was silent. Soldiers stood side by side with politicians, farmers stood next to scientists, and ordinary workers filled the balconies. No one argued. No one raised their voice. The silence was heavier than any speech. An old general, his uniform worn with decades of service, finally stood. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice was steady, deep, and sharp. He looked at the crowd and spoke the words everyone had been waiting for. For years, he said, we have been kind. We thought kindness would bring us respect. We thought patience would bring us peace. But the galaxy has mistaken our kindness for fear. They have mistaken our patience for weakness. They believed they could slaughter our children and we would bow again. They believed we would forgive. They believed wrong. The hall shook with the sound of voices rising together. From the highest balconies to the deepest seats, humanity answered with one word: enough. That word spread faster than any fleet could travel. Across the colonies, in the great cities of Earth, in the lonely outposts far beyond the trade routes, the word echoed. Miners shouted it from the tunnels. Farmers whispered it in the fields. Pilots repeated it in the cockpits of their ships. Children drew it on the walls of their schools. Humanity, for the first time, spoke with one voice. The Zerkal Dominion did not take the word seriously. To them, humans were nothing more than noisy traders who could be crushed like insects. They laughed at the news. They told the galaxy that humans would cry for a while and then return to bowing their heads. The Zerkal believed they had taught humanity a lesson. But they did not understand the storm they had awakened. For the first time in centuries, humanity stopped thinking about peace. They began to think about war. Factories that once built ships for carrying grain and ore now changed their designs. The same engineers who once dreamed of faster trade routes now poured their minds into building weapons of steel and fire. Soldiers who had guarded borders quietly now prepared to march into enemy space. Entire industries turned their strength to one goal: war. Families who had once feared the front lines now sent their sons and daughters willingly. A farmer handing his daughter a rifle before she joined the military told her, "We plant seeds in the ground, but you will plant hope among the stars." Workers who had lost homes in Erebos forged new metal with fire in their eyes. Children wrote letters to soldiers they had never met, promising to wait for them, promising to carry their memory. The change was not only in weapons, but in spirit. Humanity became one mind, one will, one force. No longer scattered colonies begging for help. No longer a weak voice at the council's table. Humanity had become a fist clenched tight, ready to strike. The galaxy watched with growing unease. For years they had called humans harmless, patient, and weak. But now they saw something else. They saw determination carved into every face. They saw unity stronger than steel. They saw grief transformed into rage. The whispers began in other halls, on other worlds. Perhaps the humans are not so weak after all. Some trembled, some prepared for war themselves, and some prayed that the storm would not reach their worlds, but the storm had already begun. On the edge of human space, fleets gathered. They were not the largest fleets the galaxy had ever seen, nor the oldest. But they were filled with something, rarer than technology, something deadlier than numbers. They were filled with the burning will of a people who had decided never again. The last message sent to every soldier before departure carried only two words: "Remember Erebos." And with that, humanity stepped into war. The fleets of humanity were ready, but before they struck back, they remembered. Every soldier carried the memory of Erebos, every captain held the image of burning fields in their heart, and every admiral repeated the words carved into stone. This is the price of weakness. It was not only soldiers who remembered. In the markets of Earth, mothers carried pictures of children lost in Erebos. In the colonies, workers sang songs of grief as they built ships. Every human, whether young or old, carried the pain like a fire inside. Humanity was not just going to war with guns, they were going to war with memory. The first confrontation came sooner than expected. A small Zerkal fleet appeared near the colony of New Avalon, expecting an easy raid. They believed humans would beg again, as they had begged for Erebos. But this time, the humans were waiting. Admiral Reyes stood on the command deck of the battleship Iron Resolve. His face was lined with exhaustion, but his eyes were sharp and cold. When the Zerkal ships appeared, his officers looked at him for orders. Reyes did not shout. He spoke calmly, like a man announcing the end of a long silence. Open fire. The human fleet moved with precision. Missiles streaked across the void, cannons thundered, fighters swarmed like angry hornets. The Zerkal ships, expecting fear, found only fury. Within minutes, their first cruiser exploded in a storm of fire. The second fell soon after. The humans did not fight for survival. They fought for justice. For the first time, the Zerkal realized the humans were no longer weak. When the battle ended, not a single Zerkal ship remained. The silence of space was broken only by the cheers of human crews. Some cried, some shouted, and some simply stared at the wreckage with tears in their eyes. It was not just victory, it was the first message. The next day, the story spread across the stars. The news networks called it the first strike. Survivors told the tale of how human ships fought with the strength of 10 fleets. Other species, who had doubted humanity, began to whisper, "The humans have changed." But humanity was not finished sending messages. The government broadcast a declaration to the entire galaxy. The message was short, only a few sentences, but it was heard on every world, in every language. We have been patient, we have been kind, we have endured every insult, every wound, every loss. But no more. To the Zerkal Dominion, know this. Humanity remembers. Humanity will answer. We are coming. The galaxy trembled at those words. Some feared the humans, others hoped they would succeed, and many simply watched, uncertain. But the Zerkal laughed. They dismissed the humans as children playing with fire. They called Erebos a necessary lesson. They believed that no matter how loud the humans shouted, the war would end quickly. They were wrong. As the weeks passed, human fleets struck again and again. Outposts were liberated, Zerkal patrols destroyed, and supply lines burned. Every battle was fought, with a fire that could not be measured in numbers. Human pilots would ram their ships rather than surrender. Human soldiers fought to the last breath rather than retreat. The Zerkal were stunned. For centuries they had ruled through fear. But humans had already felt the worst fear, watching their children burn, and so they feared nothing now. On the ruins of one captured Zerkal station, human marines painted words on the broken walls. This is the price of cruelty. It was an answer to Erebos, a message written not in stone but in blood and fire. Admiral Reyes stood once more on his ship's deck after another victory. His officers congratulated him, but his eyes stayed fixed on the stars. He knew this was only the beginning. The Zerkal were powerful. Their empire stretched across dozens of systems. Humanity was still small compared to them. But Reyes also knew something the Zerkal could never understand. Humans were no longer fighting for survival. They were fighting for meaning, for justice, for every soul lost on Erebos. That kind of fire could not be extinguished. As night fell, on Earth, children went to sleep listening to new stories. Not the stories of weakness or patience, but of courage and fire. They dreamed of fleets rising from the dark, carrying banners of hope. They dreamed of a future where no one could ever again call humans weak. The message of blood had been sent, and humanity had only just begun. On Earth, the great cities no longer slept. Factories burned their lights day and night, pouring steel into ships that would sail among the stars. Entire planets turned themselves into workshops of war. But even as the hammers struck and the engines roared, there was a strange silence across humanity. It was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of determination, the silence that comes before a storm breaks. In the Grand Assembly Hall, the leaders of humanity met once more. The air was heavy with the weight of decisions that would shape not only their future, but the future of the galaxy itself. They had fought their first battles and won, but everyone knew the Zerkal Dominion had not yet shown its full strength. The enemy had fleets many times larger, armies hardened by centuries of conquest and weapons older than human civilization itself. Some leaders trembled at the thought. "If we go further," one senator whispered, "we may bring destruction upon every colony. The Zerkal will not forgive." But the people no longer cared for forgiveness. Forgiveness had been their gift for decades, and it had been thrown back in their faces. Now forgiveness was gone. An old soldier, scarred from battles long before the stars, rose to speak. His voice carried through the chamber, strong and steady. "We have already paid the price of patience. We have buried our children, our brothers, our sisters. We have watched our homes burn while the galaxy laughed. Tell me, what more can the Zerkal take from us? We have nothing left to lose. But we have everything left to protect." The hall was silent for a moment. Then, one by one, voices rose. "Enough," someone whispered. "Enough," another answered. Soon the chamber thundered with the chant, "Enough! Enough! Enough!" The decision was clear. Humanity would not retreat. Humanity would not bow. Humanity would march forward no matter the cost. Across the stars, ordinary people felt the same fire. On mining colonies, workers melted the very walls of their tunnels to forge weapons. On farming worlds, families sent their best sons and daughters to join the fleets. On space stations, engineers rewired old cargo ships into makeshift warships. Humanity was moving with one heart, one mind, one will. But in the quiet moments, fear still lingered. Parents hugged their children tighter, knowing the war would be long. Soldiers sat in their bunks writing letters, not knowing if they would live to see them delivered. And yet, behind every fear burned something stronger: resolve. The Zerkal watched from a distance, still laughing. In their grand halls, they mocked humanity's efforts. "The humans build their little ships," one warlord sneered, "but we will crush them when we choose." They did not understand. They saw weapons being built, but they did not see the spirit being forged. Admiral Reyes knew this truth well. Standing aboard the Iron Resolve, he spoke to his officers. "The Zerkal believe this is a war of ships and numbers. They are wrong. This is a war of hearts. They cannot measure our fire. They cannot understand our will. And that is why they will lose." Those words spread across the fleets, whispered from soldier to soldier, written on the walls of mess halls, painted on the sides of ships. Humanity was no longer an audience in the galaxy. They were no longer the quiet voice at the table. They were a storm rising, and the storm would not stop until justice was done. On the night before the great offensive, the soldiers gathered in silence. No songs, no speeches, only silence. Each of them thought of home, of Earth's green fields, of Mars's red deserts, of colonies under golden suns. Each of them thought of Erevos, the wound that would never heal. And in that silence they made a promise, not to themselves but to all of humanity. They would fight not only for victory, but for dignity. They would fight to make sure no one ever again carved words of weakness into their ruins. They would fight so that every child could grow up unafraid. The storm was ready. The galaxy did not yet know it, but the quiet was over. The storm of humanity was about to break. The decision had been made. Humanity would no longer wait, no longer beg, no longer endure. The galaxy had mistaken kindness for weakness, and now the galaxy would see the truth. But a promise of war meant nothing without the strength to carry it out. Humanity needed ships, weapons, soldiers, and courage, and they found all of it within themselves. On Earth, the great factories roared louder than they ever had before. Once they had built ships for trade, vessels for science, and peaceful explorers to map the unknown. Now every beam of steel, every drop of fuel, and every spark of energy went into war. Cargo haulers were reborn as armored carriers. Research stations turned into weapons laboratories. Even the smallest workshops, hidden in the corners of distant colonies, shaped bullets and blades. The sky above Mars was filled with shipyards. Enormous frames of warships floated like skeletons, growing day by day as workers hammered life into them. Children pointed to the stars, watching as vessels took shape, whispering that one day they too would sail into battle. Farmers, who once dreamed of harvests, now dreamed of victory. Miners, who once dug for trade, now dug for the survival of their people. Humanity had become a machine of purpose, and every part of it moved toward one goal. But weapons alone were not enough. Soldiers were needed, hearts willing to fight, hands willing to bleed. And they came, by the millions. They left their farms, their schools, their homes, and lined up at recruitment halls. Old veterans who thought they had seen their last fight put on their uniforms again. Young men and women, barely past childhood, volunteered with fire in their eyes. Some carried pictures of lost families. Others carried nothing but rage. All carried one word in their hearts: Erebos. Training camps spread across the worlds. Recruits learned to march, to fire, to endure, but more importantly, they learned why they fought. Every night, their instructors told them stories of Erebos. They showed them images of ruined homes, burned fields, and carved words of cruelty. And every night, recruits went to sleep with their fists clenched, swearing they would never allow such horrors again. Humanity's scientists, too, joined the March of War. They unlocked weapons that had been locked away, technologies once deemed too dangerous for use. Plasma cannons, stealth drives, and new forms of armor left the laboratories. Some scientists wept at their creations, ashamed of the destruction they would cause, but even they knew this was not a war humanity had chosen. This was a war forced upon them. To survive, they would use every tool they had. The galaxy watched this transformation with unease. The great powers who had once laughed at humanity now whispered in fear. The humans are changing, they said. The humans are uniting. Some tried to offer warnings, urging restraint. But restraint had been humanity's way for too long. That time was over. The Zerkal Dominion, however, continued to mock. Their leaders broadcast messages to the galaxy, laughing at human preparations. The insects build their nests. One Zerkal commander sneered, "We will crush them when the time comes." They did not see the danger. They did not understand that what they faced was not just a collection of ships, but the will of an entire species forged in grief. Admiral Reyes stood in the command center of the Iron Resolve, watching the reports come in. New fleets were ready. Armies were trained. Factories were producing at record speed. Humanity, for the first time in history, was united, not by fear, not by politics, but by pain and determination. He turned to his officers and spoke softly, but every word carried the weight of fire. They think this is only war. They are wrong. This is justice. This is survival. This is our answer. Across the stars, soldiers painted the same words on their ships and armor. Remember Erebos. It became more than a slogan. It became a prayer, a vow, a promise to the dead and the living alike. The war machine was complete. Humanity had taken the pain of one broken colony and turned it into a fire that would light every battlefield. The storm was no longer just coming. The storm was ready to strike. The galaxy held its breath when the human fleets finally moved. For months, their shipyards had burned with fire. For months, soldiers had trained and weapons had been forged. Now the storm that everyone feared was leaving its cradle. It sailed across the stars with banners of vengeance. Humanity was done waiting. Humanity was done forgiving. The first target was not a great world nor a mighty fortress. It was a Zerkal supply hub, orbiting the barren moon of Korath. From this place, the Dominion fed its fleets, supplied its war machines, and chained entire systems with fear. The Zerkal thought it was untouchable. They believed no one would dare attack it, but the humans came. Admiral Reyes stood tall on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, staring at the swirling stars. Around him, dozens of human ships floated in silence, engines dimmed, weapons primed. He raised his hand slowly, and in that moment, the entire fleet waited for his words. His voice was calm, but every syllable carried fire. Today we send our answer. For Erebos. For every life they took. We will show them we are not weak. We will show them what it means when humanity says, enough. The order was given. The fleet surged forward. Engines roared to life, lighting the darkness with trails of fire. Fighters burst from carriers, swarming like furious hornets. Missiles streaked across the void, and cannons thundered with a sound that shook even the silence of space. The Zerkal defenders scrambled, but they were unprepared. Their commanders laughed when they first saw human ships approaching. Fools, they said. Do they think their little fleet can stand against us? But laughter turned to panic as their cruisers exploded one after another. Human pilots fought with a fury the Zerkal had never seen. They did not hesitate. They did not retreat. Every maneuver carried purpose. Every shot carried anger. A Zerkal dreadnought turned its massive guns on the Iron Resolve. For a moment, the stars lit with fire as shells and beams rained down. The hull shook, alarm screamed, but Reyes stood firm. His officers looked to him, fear in their eyes, but he only said, "Hold the line. Do not break." And the humans held. Fighters swarmed the dreadnought, diving through its defenses, hammering it again and again. One pilot, with his ship burning, rammed straight into the enemy's reactor. The explosion tore through the dreadnought, splitting it apart in a storm of light. Human voices cheered across the comms, but behind every cheer was the memory of Erebos. They were not fighting for glory, they were fighting for justice. Within hours, the great supply hub was in ruins. Human marines stormed the stations, clearing them room by room. For the first time, Zerkal soldiers felt fear. The humans did not fight like others. They did not stop when wounded. They did not surrender when cornered. They fought as if every breath was borrowed, as if every strike carried the weight of a fallen world. When the battle ended, the human flag was raised above the shattered station. A message was broadcast across the galaxy, spoken by Admiral Reyes himself. To the Zerkal Dominion, you carved words into the ruins of our homes. You told us weakness has a price. Now you will learn the price of cruelty. Humanity remembers. Humanity will never forgive. The galaxy trembled at those words. For centuries, humans had been the quiet ones, the patient ones. Now they were the storm. On Earth, families gathered around their screens, weeping with pride. On the colonies, children shouted the name of Erebos as if it were a battle cry. Soldiers raised their fists, whispering the same promise, never again. But victory carried a cost. Hundreds of human lives were lost in the first strike. Entire ships burned with their crews inside. Letters would never reach their homes. Mothers and fathers would wait for sons and daughters who would not return. Humanity celebrated, but it also mourned. Still, the message was clear. The Zerkal had believed humans would bow again. Instead, they had been struck harder than ever before. Their fleets were not invincible. Their empire was not untouchable. And humanity had only just begun its war. The first strike was not just a battle. It was a warning. The storm had arrived. The first strike had shaken the galaxy. For the first time, the Zerkal Dominion had been wounded. Their supply hub was gone, their fleets had been humbled, and their arrogance cracked. The galaxy whispered, in awe, "The humans have risen." But victory was not free. On Earth, families waited for messages from their sons and daughters. Some received news of survival, tears of joy filling their eyes. Others received silence. Silence that meant their children had died in the blackness of space, names to be remembered but voices never heard again. The war was young, but already humanity had learned the truth. Rage could fuel courage, but it also demanded blood. In the Yo, military hospitals orbiting Mars, the wounded lay in long rows, soldiers missing arms, pilots burned from crashes, Marines scarred from close combat. All carried the marks of war. Yet not a single one complained. Some smiled through their pain, whispering, "At least Erebos has been avenged." Others asked when they could return to battle, refusing to rest while the Dominion still lived. Admiral Reyes walked among them when he could, his hands clasped behind his back. He spoke quietly to each soldier, listening to their stories. Some wept as they told him about families left behind. Others begged him to keep fighting, even if they themselves could not return. Reyes listened to all of them, but when he left the halls of the wounded, his heart grew heavier. Every face stayed with him. Every loss was a weight he carried. The Zerkal, humiliated by their defeat, struck back with fury. They sent fleets into human space, targeting colonies near the borders. Battles burned through the skies. On some worlds, the Zerkal managed to land and the fighting turned to streets and forests. Human Marines fought like wolves defending their den, refusing to retreat. Villages became fortresses, rivers became lines of fire, and every inch of land was bought with blood. In one such battle, the colony of Asteron IV stood against overwhelming Zerkal forces. The defenders knew they could not win, but they fought anyway. Families armed themselves with rifles, children carried supplies to the barricades, and old men lit explosives to block the streets. For 3 days and nights, Asteron burned. When reinforcements finally arrived, the colony was in ruins, but the Zerkal had been stopped. Humanity mourned the dead, but also honored them as heroes. Stories like Asteron spread quickly. They became symbols of humanity's spirit. Ordinary, people standing against impossible odds. The galaxy listened, astonished. Other civilizations had fought wars before, but rarely had they seen such unity, such stubborn refusal to surrender. Yet the cost was real. Funerals filled the days on Earth and the colonies. Flags were folded and handed to grieving families. Mothers held them close to their hearts, fathers wept quietly in the dark, and children asked questions no one wanted to answer. Why did they have to die? Why did the Zerkal hate us? There were no simple answers. Only the vow that their deaths would not be in vain. Despite the pain, humanity grew stronger. Every loss only sharpened their will. Every fallen soldier became a reason to fight harder. The Zerkal mocked them, saying, "Your fury will fade. Your strength will break." But they did not understand humans. For every human buried, 3 more rose to take their place. For every ship lost, 2 more were built. Grief was not a chain for humanity. It was fuel. Admiral Reyes understood this better than anyone. In a speech broadcast across the fleets, he spoke with a voice steady and cold. "Yes, we pay in blood. Yes, we bury our own. But hear me, Dominion. You cannot scare us with death. We have already seen the worst. You cannot break us with fire. We were born in fire. You cannot silence us. Every voice you kill becomes an echo in our hearts. We are humanity, and we do not stop." The soldiers cheered, but behind their cheers were tears. They knew the price they paid every day. They knew the war would claim more lives before it ended. Yet none of them turned away. The rage of humanity had a price, but it was a price they were willing to pay. And the Zerkal had not yet seen the storm at its strongest. The early days of the war were filled with blood and sorrow, but also with lessons. Humanity learned quickly. Every battle revealed something new, how the Zerkal fleets moved, how their commanders thought, and how their weapons worked. At first, the humans fought with raw rage, but soon that rage was shaped into strategy. Admiral Reyes and his commanders studied every fragment of enemy technology. Scientists worked day and night to understand Zerkal shields and engines. Engineers on Mars built new weapons that could pierce armor once thought unbreakable. Pilots trained in endless drills, learning to fly not just with skill, but with creativity. Humanity was no longer just surviving. They were preparing to win. The first proof came at the Battle of Orion's Belt, A Zerkal fleet entered the system, confident that humans would scatter. Instead, they found a trap waiting. Human ships hid in asteroid fields, engines cold, silent as shadows. When the Zerkal passed, the asteroids came alive with fire. Missiles and railguns ripped into their cruisers before they could react. Fighters darted between rocks, striking from every direction. By the time the Zerkal organized their defense, half their fleet was burning. The rest fled in panic. News of the victory spread like wildfire. On Earth, people filled the streets with cheers. Colonies lit their skies with fireworks, honoring the soldiers who fought among the stars. For the first time, humanity felt hope. Not just revenge, not just anger, but the real possibility of triumph. But it was not only on the battlefield that the tide turned. Across the galaxy, other species watched with growing interest. For centuries, they had lived under the shadow of the Dominion, bowing to its power. Now, for the first time, they saw someone stand tall against it, and not fall. Quietly, whispers began. If humans can resist, why not us? Some worlds sent messages of support. Small ships carrying food, medicine, or intelligence slipped into human-controlled space. A few brave alien warriors even joined human fleets, eager to fight. Beside those who had shown the galaxy that resistance was possible, the Dominion dismissed them as fools, but Reyes welcomed every ally. This is not only our fight, he said. It is the fight of all who wish to be free. Yet the war was far from over. The Zerkal still commanded vast armies and countless worlds. Their fleets were larger, their weapons more advanced, and their cruelty unshaken. But their weakness was pride. They believed humans were reckless, that victory would eventually crush their spirit. They did not understand that the more they pressed, the more humanity resisted. In the skies above Vera Prime, this truth became clear. The Zerkal unleashed one of their largest assaults, determined to crush the humans once and for all. Their fleet blotted out the stars, thousands of ships strong. Against them stood a smaller human force, outnumbered 5-1. But Reyes did not retreat. Instead, he ordered the fleet forward. His voice rang through the comms. They believe numbers will break us. They are wrong. We are not here to match their strength. We are here to show them our will. The battle burned for 2 days. Space itself seemed to shatter with fire. Ships exploded in blinding light, wreckage spinning into the void. Human captains sacrificed themselves to protect their allies. Pilots fought until their ships were nothing but burning fragments. And yet somehow the line held. In the end, Vera Prime was saved. The Zerkal fleet limped away, broken and humiliated. Humanity had stood against impossible odds and endured. The galaxy trembled. No one had ever resisted the Dominion like this. No one had ever fought so fiercely, so stubbornly, so relentlessly. The whispers grew louder. In distant corners of space, rebellions stirred. The Zerkal were no longer untouchable. Their enemies had found a beacon. Humanity. On Earth, people wept as they watched the reports. They mourned the dead, but they also saw the future. For the first time, the dream of victory did not feel like madness. It felt real. The war was far from over, and many battles still lay ahead. But humanity had turned the tide. The Zerkal had wanted to break their spirit. Instead, they had lit a fire that was spreading across the galaxy. The storm was growing. The war that began with humanity's fury was no longer theirs alone. Word of their defiance had spread far beyond their borders. From one star system to another, whispers grew louder. The story of humans who had lost everything, yet refused to bow, lit a fire in the hearts of many. For centuries, the Zerkal Dominion had ruled with iron claws. Worlds paid endless tribute. Civilizations lived in chains. Entire species had forgotten what freedom felt like. But now they saw something new. Humans who stood. Humans who fought. Humans who bled yet still moved forward. And slowly, the galaxy began to awaken. The first to join were the Rylari, a proud race of avian beings who had long been enslaved by the Zerkal. Their wings had been clipped, their skies stolen. Yet when they saw humanity defy the Dominion, courage stirred in them once again. Small groups of Rilari pilots slipped away from their masters and flew into human space. They offered their wings, their ships, and their loyalty. Admiral Reyes welcomed them, his voice steady. You do not fight for us. You fight for yourselves, for freedom. Stand with us, and no one will ever clip your wings again. Next came the Thalori, amphibious traders, whose worlds had been bled dry by Zerkal. Taxes. They brought supplies, medicines, and technology to human colonies, risking the wrath of the Dominion. Others followed, small groups, hidden cells, scattered rebels who had waited for a sign. Now they had one. Humanity had become the spark they needed. The Zerkal watched this with growing unease. For the first time in centuries, their enemies were multiplying. Their fleets still dwarfed humanity's, but cracks were forming. Where once their rule had been absolute, now uprisings flared. A transport was ambushed here. A governor was assassinated there. Minor worlds declared rebellion. None of it would have mattered alone. But together, it was like 1,000 cuts to a giant. In the halls of their capital, the Zerkal lords argued with anger. The humans must be crushed, some roared. Destroy their Earth, burn their colonies, show the galaxy that resistance is hopeless. But others for the first time whispered words of doubt. They fight differently, they said. They do not fear death. They do not yield. And now others rally to them. If we destroy one world, 3 more will rise in its name. Fear. That word had never been spoken among the Zerkal before, but it was there now, like a shadow in the back of their minds. Meanwhile, the humans pressed forward. Every battle was still costly, every victory still painted with blood, but their strength grew. With allies by their side, they struck deeper into Dominion space. Human fleets fought beside Rilari squadrons, their fighters soaring like living meteors. Thalori supply ships kept armies alive in the darkest hours. For the first time, humanity was not alone. In one battle above the shattered world of Zaralok, a joint force of humans and allies faced a Zerkal fleet 3 times their size. The Dominion expected an easy victory. Instead, they were met with fire and fury. Human warships fought at the front. Rilari fighters swarmed the enemy's flanks, and Thalori engineers jammed their comms. The battle lasted 3 days, but in the end, the Zerkal retreated, leaving their dead behind. The galaxy cheered. For the enslaved, for the beaten, for the hopeless. It was proof that the Dominion could bleed. It was proof that they could lose. Across countless worlds, the oppressed lifted their heads for the first time in generations. Back on Earth, people watched the stars with pride. Families who had once wept now spoke with hope. Children grew up dreaming not of survival, but of victory. Humanity had started this war in pain and rage, but now they carried something greater, hope not just for themselves, but for all. And the Zerkal? They still roared, still threatened, still fought with fire. But deep inside, they had begun to understand something terrible. The storm they had unleashed was no longer only human. The storm belonged to the galaxy, and it was growing stronger every day. The final battle began before dawn. The Zerkal had gathered everything they could spare, their largest fleet ever assembled, stretching across the darkness of space like a black tide. They believed that humanity, worn by war and losses, would finally break. They believed patience had been replaced with desperation, and that desperation would lead to defeat. But they were wrong. Admiral Reyes stood on the bridge of the Iron Resolve, his eyes scanning the horizon where the enemy fleet gleamed like a river of shadows. Around him, human officers moved with calm precision. Soldiers had already made their peace with death if it came. They did not fight out of fear. They fought out of fire. They fought for the memory of Erevos, for every fallen comrade, for every world that had whispered hope. Reyes raised his hand slowly. For humanity, for freedom, for all who cannot fight. Today we strike, and today we end this. The human fleet surged forward, engines blazing. Fighter squadrons darted between the colossal enemy vessels. Missiles ripped through shields. Cannons fired in unison, each shot carrying the weight of loss, courage, and fury. Every strike was precise, every maneuver a lesson learned from countless battles. Humanity was no longer reckless. They were unstoppable, and they were not alone. Allies of every kind joined them. Rylari wings sliced through enemy formations. Thalori engineers jammed Xerakal communications, and countless smaller civilizations struck at supply lines, distracting fleets and sabotaging defenses. The galaxy had risen with humanity, and together, they formed a force the Dominion had never imagined. The Xerakal warlords raged. Destroy them, crush their fleets, burn their worlds. But each command was met with defiance, each threat countered with strategy. For the first time in their history, the Dominion faced a coordinated, unstoppable rebellion. At the heart of the battle, the Iron Resolve led a direct assault on the Xerakal flagship, the dreadnought Karzul. Reyes watched its massive guns swivel toward them, ready to obliterate his ship. But he did not flinch. Pilots streamed around the dreadnought, striking weak points revealed by engineers while human marines prepared boarding operations. The first human fighter crashed into the dreadnought's shield, followed by dozens more. Explosions lit the void as marines breached the enemy hull, fighting in corridors where every step counted. Soldiers shouted their vows over the roar of battle, voices carrying across comms to the fleets. Remember Erevos. Remember every world. We fight for all of us. Inside the dreadnought, Xerakal soldiers fell one by one, stunned by the humans' fury and skill. They had faced battle-hardened armies before, but never like this. Humanity did not fight only to survive. Humanity fought to win, to avenge, to free every soul that had suffered under the Dominion. Finally, after hours of relentless assault, the dreadnought's core exploded in a blinding storm of fire. The shockwave rippled through the enemy fleet. Ships broke apart. Command and control collapsed. Panic spread like wildfire, and the remaining Xerakal forces fled, broken and humiliated. Across the galaxy, the news spread instantly. The Dominion had been shattered. Humanity had not only survived, they had conquered. But more importantly, they had proven something greater, that even the smallest, weakest species, when united and determined, could rise above the mighty. On Earth, people wept openly. Children ran through the streets, shouting in joy. Families embraced, crying for those lost but celebrating the victory that their loved ones had fought for. The stars themselves seemed to shine brighter, as if the universe itself had witnessed humanity's rise. Admiral Reyes spoke one last time over the comms to every fleet, every ally, every soldier. This is not just a victory of ships and weapons. This is the victory of courage, of will, of humanity. We were patient. We were kind. And when the galaxy thought we were weak, we said, enough. Today we have proven that humanity will not bow, will not fear, and will never forget. The stars belong to all who fight for freedom, and we will defend it together. The galaxy listened. The Xerakal fled to the far edges of their empire, never again to threaten human space. Systems once silenced by fear rose in hope. The oppressed knew that if humans could resist, if humans could win, then freedom was possible for everyone. For the first time, humanity stood at the center of the galaxy, not as the weak newcomer, but as a force to be respected, feared, and admired. They had endured insult, betrayal, and tragedy. But in the end, their patience, their courage, and their unity had created a legacy that no one could erase. And as humans looked to the stars, they knew this was only the beginning. The galaxy would never forget them. Humanity had stopped being nice. Humanity had said, enough. And when they did, the war began. And they had won. The storm of humanity had arrived.